Ever heard of a house party that lasted for over a year? Well, welcome to the Siege of Constantinople, 718, one of the longest block parties in history. Now this wasn't your typical block party with barbecues and bouncy castles. This was a full-on year-long siege, with the Byzantine Emperor Leo III playing the reluctant host to the Umayyad Caliphate. Now Leo III wasn't too keen on these uninvited guests, so he decided to make their stay as uncomfortable as possible. He had the city walls fortified, the food supplies secured, and the Byzantine navy on standby. It was a classic case of playing hard to get, and guess what? It worked. The Umayyad Caliphate, tired and frustrated, finally packed up their siege engines and left. Leo III had successfully defended Constantinople, effectively halting the Arab expansion into Europe. So next time someone overstays their welcome, just remember it could be worse. You could be in the Siege of Constantinople. Imagine being the underdog in a fight and coming out on top. That's exactly what happened in the Battle of Tours, in the year 732. The Frankish forces, led by the illustrious Charles Martel, found themselves pitted against the formidable Umayyad Caliphate. Now the Umayyads had their eyes set on Western Europe, aiming to expand their Muslim empire. But Charles Martel and his Frankish troops had other plans. Against all odds, they managed to pull off a stunning victory, halting the Umayyads' westward expansion in its tracks. This wasn't just a military win, mind you. This victory prevented the Muslim conquest of Western Europe, reshaping the course of history as we know it. So remember folks, never underestimate the little guy. They might just pull a Charles Martel on you. This was the Frankish Tour de Force, a true testament to the indomitable spirit of the underdog. Ever wondered where democratic elections started? Well, it wasn't America, it was Europe, with the Golden Bull of 1356. Let's wind back the clock to the 14th century, when Charles IV, Holy Roman Emperor, decided it was high time to establish an electoral process. This wasn't your typical trip to the polling station, oh no. This was about selecting the next Holy Roman Emperor. Charles IV issued what we know as the Golden Bull, and it wasn't about livestock. This document, made of golden letters, laid out the rules for electing the emperor. It was a 7-section charter, with each section representing one of the 7 prince-electors. These were the bigwigs who got to cast their vote for the next emperor. This process was revolutionary. It was one of the earliest forms of representative democracy in Europe, shaping the political landscape for centuries to come. And that's how Europe got its first taste of democracy, folks, all thanks to a golden bull, no less. Imagine uniting 3 countries under one rule. Sounds like something out of Game of Thrones, right? Well, that's exactly what Margaret I did in the Union of Kalmar, 1397. Picture this: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, each with their own unique cultures, languages, and even currencies, all suddenly brought together under the rule of one indomitable queen. And it wasn't a walk in the park, mind you. Margaret had to play the ultimate game of political chess, negotiating, persuading, and sometimes even strong-arming her way to create this union. She was the original power broker, a veritable force of nature. Her reign left an indelible mark on Nordic history, shaping the political landscape of Scandinavia for centuries to come. Her legacy, a lesson in diplomacy, determination, and the sheer power of a woman with a vision. So, next time you're watching a medieval drama, remember Margaret I. She was the real deal. 30 years of war is enough to make anyone scream group therapy, and that's exactly what happened with the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. Picture this: Europe, tired and torn apart by 3 decades of relentless conflict, decides enough is enough. The result? A series of peace treaties, collectively known as the Peace of Westphalia. These treaties weren't just about ending the 30 Years' War, though. They marked a pivotal shift in how Europe conducted its politics. The concept of state sovereignty was born, meaning each state had the right to govern itself without external interference. This was a game-changer, folks. It transformed how nations interacted, laying the groundwork for modern diplomacy. The Peace of Westphalia was more than just a ceasefire. It was Europe's first attempt at collective healing, a step towards a more cooperative and less combative future. So, remember folks, it's never too late for a little group therapy. Just ask Europe. Ever fought over a piece of cake at a party? Well, Europe did just that in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. Imagine a group of powerful folks gathering around a grand table, not for a feast, but for a strategic meeting. This wasn't your average meetup, this was the Berlin Conference. a moment that drastically reshaped Africa's borders and future. Picture this: 14 European nations, all with their own agendas and appetites, deciding the fate of a continent that wasn't even present at the table. It's like deciding who gets the strawberry topping without asking the cake. This conference was a monumental cut-the-cake moment for Europe. But the slices were not evenly divided. Oh no. The big players, Britain and France, took the largest slices, carving out vast territories for themselves. The smaller nations had to make do with the crumbs. Africa was divided up, like a cake on a platter, with arbitrary lines drawn on the map, splitting ethnic groups and merging rival tribes. But why, you ask? Well, it was all about power, control, and resources. Europe was in the throes of the Industrial Revolution, and they needed raw materials for their factories. Africa, with its vast resources, was the perfect solution. But they couldn't just waltz in and take what they wanted. They needed to establish rules of the game to avoid conflict amongst themselves. Hence, the Berlin Conference. This cut-the-cake moment had far-reaching consequences. It laid the groundwork for the colonization of Africa, leading to decades of exploitation, conflict, and struggle for independence. The arbitrary borders drawn by the European powers still shape Africa's political landscape today, often being at the heart of ongoing conflicts. So, next time you're dividing a cake, remember the Berlin Conference. Just make sure you do a better job. Because let's face it, nobody likes a party where the cake is unfairly divided, and when it comes to continents, the stakes are considerably higher. So, let's strive for a world where everyone gets a fair slice of the cake, shall we? Ever been to a demolition party? Well, in 1989, Europe threw the biggest one in history with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, when you think of parties, you probably think of balloons, cake, and maybe a cheeky bit of dancing. But back in 1989, Europe decided to mix things up a bit. Instead of popping balloons, they were tearing down walls. And not just any wall, mind you, but the Berlin Wall, a hulking mass of concrete and steel that had divided a city, a country, and indeed the entire continent for decades. But why was the Berlin Wall such a big deal, you ask? Well, it was more than just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of the Cold War, a symbol of division, a symbol of the ideological battle that had gripped the world since the end of the Second World War. So, when the wall finally came down, it was a cause for celebration. The demolition party was on, and it was a sight to behold. People from both sides of the wall, east and west, came together to tear down this symbol of division. It was a party that lasted days, with music, laughter, and tears of joy echoing throughout the city. The fall of the Berlin Wall didn't just mark the end of the Cold War, it also led to the reunification of Germany, a momentous event that had been unthinkable just a few years prior. And as if that wasn't enough, it also kicked off the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. Countries that had been under the Soviet Union's thumb for decades started to break free, one by one. The demolition party of 1989 was a turning point, a moment in history that signified a new beginning for Europe. It was a party that celebrated freedom, unity, and the end of an era. So remember, folks, sometimes the best party is a demolition party.